Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to Faithful Healing with Hannah. This is episode 2 of Faithful Healing, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys. On this episode, we have a sister struggling to understand how does she maintain ties with her absent father whom she resents. Also, an interesting question was submitted. Can women do Itikaf during Ramadan? And how can anyone benefit from Ramadan, even if they're not Muslim? All of this and more, inshallah, on Faithful Healing. So let's get into it. If you are new here, my name is Hannah. And on this show, I try to help Muslims just like yourself navigate the hardships of life through my experience as a trauma and self improvement coach. If you'd like to submit your questions, coaching, the link is always in the description below. You can also find it in the description of any video on my YouTube channel from this point forward. If your question is ever selected to be on the show, you will get an email notifying you as well. So let's start off with a funny video that perfectly describes what it's like growing up as a Muslim in the West. In one moment while I get this pulled up for you guys. If you're here live, give a salam, and if you are not here live but watching the replay, drop a comment below, inshallah.
In the West, no cap, this is how close haram is to you 24/7. Subhanallah, astaghfirullah. Right there. Look, right at the Aqaba, right at the gates. Subhanallah. Right next to my astaghfirullah. Maybe y'all in them nice neighborhoods don't see this all the time, you know what I'm saying? But we, the masakin, this is an everyday reality, you feel me? Hey, listen, in the West, no cap, this is how close haram is to you 24.
That honestly had me laughing way too hard when I first saw it. Shout out to Kurt Icy for sharing that really funny video on his Instagram. You can go follow him, inshallah. He posts a lot of different things just about funny Muslim culture in the West. All right, let's. Okay, so what did I think about this video? You know, it's meant to be funny, but the scary thing is that this really is a reality if you're growing up in the West, and more we're seeing it in societies that are would consider themselves Islamic, and that's actually really terrifying to see sin so apparent in our everyday world. The thing about it is that Western society is becoming more and more godless, and when you remove God or the concept of God from a society, at the end of the day, a society that is godless is guideless. And so you'll have situations where people are going to fall prey to their lower selves, to their ego, to their nafs, as we call it in our deen. And then they lose themselves in the pleasures of this world, this dunya, because without God, what else is there to live for in this dunya? So it's interesting to say because obviously Muslims fall for it as well. But the thing about it is for us, it's obviously much worse because we have the key out. We have the Quran, we have the Sunnah of the Prophet, ﷺ. We have the recipe that protects us from feeling like we have to lower ourselves to a point that the only thing we find ourselves chasing in this world is our desires. And that's something that people literally search their entire life for. And it's not how often we take it for granted. So just a little bit of humor with a serious side note, inshallah. Yes, this is live. Wa alaikum salam to everybody. So we're going to jump right into our first submission, inshallah. Afnan from, she called it Somaliland, so I'm going to assume that she is talking about Minnesota, says, Dear Hannah, my question is about i'tikaf for women. I read somewhere that women can do i'tikaf, but I'm still really unsure. What about the sleeping part? There's probably no other women there, but it's such a big opportunity, I don't want to miss it. And how can I possibly ask the imam for permission when I can't go into the men's side as a woman? What about not having a mahram with you? Hannah, if you see this question, may Allah keep us steadfast and reward us with Jannah. Ameen. Thank you so much for the beautiful dua. So let's talk about this, inshallah. Wa alaikum salam to everyone who is in the live chat. Let's talk about this real quick. So first of all, for those of you guys who don't know, what is i'tikaf? I'tikaf is basically the practice of isolating oneself in the masjid for a certain period of time. People who are in i'tikaf usually are doing it during Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ, we have narration saying that the Prophet ﷺ used to go into i'tikaf during the last 10 nights of of Ramadan. And so because of that, we see that being a pretty common practice. If you are in i'tikaf, you are not allowed to leave the masjid. So you stay in the masjid. That's why she was referencing sleeping in the masjid. Now, very commonly, i'tikaf is actually we see it performed by men, right? They'll go to the masjid, they'll usually have food packed for them, or maybe it might end up being delivered to them. They'll spend those last 10 nights of Ramadan in the masjid. So she's wondering, can a woman do it? Well, this is interesting because I grew up in a community where a lot of women actually did i'tikaf, or at the very least, even if it was a very short, like 1 day, 2 day i'tikaf. But just because I come from a community that does it doesn't necessarily mean that it's religiously valid. So I ended up looking into it and kind of looking into what the scholars say about this. So here's what I came up with. First of all, i'tikaf must be performed in the masjid, and women are also allowed to perform i'tikaf. It might be more difficult in many circumstances for women to do it, especially if they have children or the main caregivers at home. You don't necessarily want to be bringing your children for an overnight sleepover at the masjid. It can be very complicated, but it is allowable. Now, most masajid are not going to allow any woman to perform i'tikaf in the men's side of the masjid. Understandably so, it's distracting. Men are supposed to be focusing on their worship, but now you have something that is obviously culturally super abnormal, even though the Prophet ﷺ's masjid was just one big open room. What is now typical is that we have two separate sides for men and women, and it helps us to focus on our spirituality, on our worship when we're in the masjid. So what would be my advice to the sister who wants to perform i'tikaf? And I'm going to pull up the question one more time for you guys so you guys can see it. She wants to perform i'tikaf. And it's beautiful because I actually really appreciate one thing she said. It's such a big opportunity. I don't want to miss it, right? The fact that there's something that I love about this, which is, when you're a Muslim and you come across something that is a sunnah or something that just has tremendous reward regarding it, this should be a reaction. It's such a big opportunity. I don't want to miss it. So even just knowing that her intention is so strong, I really hope, and I feel confident saying that, when we intend something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if we don't get to actually enact the action, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a reward for it as if we did the action. This is from hadith. I'm not making this up. Right? The Prophet ﷺ told us this, that if we intend a good action, but something gets in the way of it and we're not able to complete the action, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes it as if we did it. That's just from his generosity. So even if she's not able to do it, I feel very comfortable saying that she's going to get the reward for it because her heart is in it. She's doing it out of the love for Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here's what I would recommend to the sister. If you really, really want to do this, it's going to take a bit of going to the board of the masjid or whoever the organizers are and seeing if you can do it on the sister side. That way there's no inappropriate mixing. That way there's no discomfort for people who are trying to just focus on their worship. And if you're able to get maybe 2, 3, 5 sisters, and obviously they're going to want someone who's overseeing this, who's probably older, maybe one of the community aunties who might be available for this. They might be able to accommodate that, inshallah. And then if it happens this year, it can also be reiterated throughout the years. This is what used to happen in our masjid, or at the very least, if you can't do full-on i'tikaf, trying to do a qiyam in the masjid where you have sisters staying overnight for that one night from after Isha Salah to Fajr time and just focusing on worship. But the really important thing about this is during Ramadan, sometimes the masjid becomes a social hub, right? And we're in the masalla and we're supposed to be focusing on our Quran, on our salah, on our dua. And especially on the women's side, we're talking all night and we're just having, we're just laughing and enjoying our time and turning it into a social event. And that strips away from the worship. And then also, if I was in charge of a board, a masjid board, and I'm having to accommodate this kind of new event for our community, and then I'm seeing that it's not being taken advantage of and it's actually turning into a social club, I would feel like, I don't know if I want to repeat this because I'd rather that our community gets the full benefit of worshiping, even if it's worshiping at home. So just be mindful of that. And inshallah, whatever it is that you end up doing, just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Kareem and He hopefully will reward you for what you have. Wa alaikum assalam to Mina from New York. And wa alaikum assalam to who said they were from ABC XYZ from Germany. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, inshallah. We are going to move on to our next and main question. Oh, I actually wanted to mention this, but some of you guys might be wondering, what's the reward of i'tikaf? Well, when I was looking into it and just kind of reading the scholarly works on i'tikaf, it seems that a lot of the ahadith that are written on i'tikaf are actually considered weak, and some were actually fabricated. So we don't have the most robust information about i'tikaf and the reward of it. We know the Prophet ﷺ used to do it, but there was one hadith that basically mentioned that the person who performs i'tikaf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will erase their past sins. So that's one virtue. And then another that it may be equivalent to performing 2 hajjs. So if you do have this in your masjid and are able to lock yourself away, you don't have work, or you're able to take time off of work, or maybe do it over the weekend if you're free, take advantage of it, inshallah. It's really cool. Moving on to the next question, inshallah. Okay. Just give me 1 second to take the banner off so you guys can actually see the question alongside me. Dear Hannah, I have been really struggling with my absent father and trying to maintain family ties with him despite the hurt he has caused, not only to me, but also to my family. Growing up, he has been in and out of my life, but when he was present, he used to compare me to my siblings, made it clear he preferred them over me, and would often belittle me and shame me. Now, as an adult, I can reflect and realize that this was most likely due to being a tomboy with a very bold personality. I was one of the few people who held him to account. This led me to have anger issues that I realized were really covering the hurt and sadness that I felt. I have since forgiven him and moved on because I truly want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I do not want anything from him on the day of judgment. My problem is that I am struggling with maintaining family ties and what that means exactly Islamically. He really brings out the worst of me, and I often get mad for the sake of my mother rather than the hurt he has caused via abandonment. I'm worried about how to handle this in the best way. I am worried about using him as a wali. I worry about displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala due to him. What is good treatment entailed exactly? I think I have done the healing work, but I know deep down that if my future husband shows me a similar trait or compares me to my siblings, it will trigger me. How do I know that I am fully healed, and how can this affect future interactions with potentials? Jazakallahu khairan for doing this and being a resource. You are very eloquent, and I'm a new but avid watcher. May Allah bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you greatly and keep you and your sincerity steadfast. Ameen. Thank you so much. This is from Jamila from Canada. And this is a really deep question, subhanAllah. So I'm going to go over some things so we can all be on the same page. Wa alaikum assalam from Seattle. I love this. I love this. Tell me where you guys are tuning in from. Tell me, where you're watching from. Let's see where the community is at. Oops, sorry about that, you guys. So let's jump into a few different things, right? I'm going to go right back to the beginning. We're going to go through this question. It's almost written as a letter and talk a bit more. So Jamila is struggling with an absent father. So let's first and foremost acknowledge the fact that as soon as she's saying absent father, that's the identity she has casted onto her father. There's a father wound there, right? There is nothing that can take away the importance of the presence of a father. And it is so sad how, especially in Western societies, we have this conception of the deadbeat dad who is in and out or barely does anything for his family or just completely ghosts them, right? In our deen, the responsibility of a father is so heavy. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that every one of us is a shepherd and we will be asked about our flock on the day of judgment. And the husband or the father is the shepherd of his family. So when he abandons that, and this might be, she didn't specify specifically what kind of abandonment, but what seems to be hinted at because she says he's been in and out of her life is this is actual physical abandonment, like he left and comes back. There's also emotional abandonment, which is also extremely painful and extremely damaging to anyone growing up. So there's a father wound there. That's just the term we cast. There's whenever we have a strained relationship with our father. When he was present, so he's gone, he's there, he's gone. Why is that a problem? Well, when you do that, especially for children growing up, the thing about children is that their attachment, we're going to jump into some trauma theory. We're going to talk about it. I'm a trauma coach. This is literally what I do. But the thing about children, their attachment is grown based on their caregivers. And so they attach to their mother, they attach to their father, and that's how they learn how to connect with other human beings throughout their life. So when there's damage in the attachment between a child and their parent, that ends up echoing throughout their life. And there's a lot of very intentional work that has to be done to undo that. You can undo it. But for those of you guys who find, why do I have such a hard time connecting with people? I don't trust people as easily. Think about what your relationship was like with your parents, or if you weren't raised by your parents, to your caregivers, and how that might reflect in those relationships. So now he's conditioning her that this is someone he can't depend. He is someone that she can't depend on, and now she's gonna form the idea that there are people that you just don't trust and people can't be depended on. And even this person who has the literal responsibility given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he'll be held accountable to it on the day of judgment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this person has this responsibility and he doesn't even take it seriously. Yet when he's present, he's belittling and shaming to her. We don't know exactly how that looks like, but if that is what she's experiencing and that's what she's feeling, that means that's what she's internalizing. It might be via comparison, which is something a lot of our parents do, but the way they do it can be extremely damaging. It makes you feel very small and unseen. For so many of us, one of the only things we would want in our lives is just to feel seen by our parents and to feel like we made them proud. And shaming, I'm not exactly sure what specifically was being shamed, but it's probably a multitude of things. She says, now as an adult, I can reflect and realize that this was most likely due to being a tomboy with a very bold personality. I was one of the few people who held him to account. So now we can see that the way she's describing her personality, she's probably finding herself at odds very commonly with her father. And it's almost making me assume, I don't know this, obviously these details, it wasn't reflected in the question, but her siblings probably didn't have that personality that was so confrontational, right? There's also a part of me that's wondering, right, as a result of this ruptured attachment, this constant, he's in and out of my life. I don't know if I can trust him when he's there. He hurts me when he's gone. It hurts me. I wonder if her tomboy personality, this is just speculation. I don't know if this is true. Maybe if she's watching this, inshallah, she can reply to the email that was sent to her and just reflect and let me know if this is true. But it makes me wonder, is her being a tomboy, was that more so a protective mechanism? Because here's the thing, right? This is especially true for women. As women, we have naturally feminine traits. That's just how it is. But the masculine traits are what are protective, right? They're the things that protect us. And so very often I see, especially in my practice in trauma, and I see this echoed a lot in the trauma community, people who are trauma practitioners, trauma coaches, trauma experts, whatever it might be, that women who have gone through intense hurt, attachment issues, trauma, abandonment, they will take on more masculine traits, or they will present more masculine traits to protect themselves. It's literally just a survival technique in a sense. I know for me, when I was dealing with my trauma, that was very largely my response. I feel like I showcased very masculine traits, even though it didn't always reflect the way I felt about myself, because it helped, in my mind, it helped to protect me from having broken trust, having to deal with pain, having to feel the hurt from other people. I later learned that actually that vulnerability that we have doesn't disappear when we mask it with our masculine anger or putting our foot down or going back and forth with someone. In fact, it sometimes makes it more deeply rooted. I'm just going to drop by and see if there are any comments. So it's making me wonder, did she take on more masculine traits so that it would be protecting her? Or it's that just sometimes some girls are just more tomboyish than usual. I know I grew up with a lot of tomboys around me who grew up to be very feminine women, mashallah. This led to anger issues that I realized were really covering the hurt and sadness that I felt. This actually further validates the possibility that she was taking on masculine traits to protect herself, because anger is a very masculine trait. But the thing about anger, and I remember hearing this from a psychologist. I was watching podcasts. He gave this analogy, and it was just a really, really interesting way to think about it. Technically, it's not an analogy, but it was just a really interesting way to think about anger. So he essentially said, anger is not a foundational emotion. Anger is almost always a cover for another emotion, right? Anger is like it's the cape or the costume that we put on our other emotions so we don't have to show our vulnerabilities through them. Anger usually hides sadness. It might hide fear. So in this instance, she's literally saying that she found that her anger issues were covering the hurt and sadness that she felt. She then goes on to say that she has since forgiven him and moved on because she really wants to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is incredible. Now, here's the thing about forgiveness. First of all, can we just shout out the sister for having the willingness to take accountability that even in the hardship that she's experiencing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still has a certain structure to how he wants us to interact with the rights of our parents. That is amazing. And so often, I think this is part of why I do the work that I do, and I do it so publicly, is because I want people to know what the general narrative is around healing trauma can be very counter to what Islam teaches us about healing. And if you want true healing as a Muslim, you need to follow the way Islam teaches us to do it and the framework that it gives us. That means you have to learn it. And if you want to learn it, please continue to watch the videos on this channel. Inshallah, I'll be putting a lot more content out about trauma and healing after Ramadan. But it can be very hard for someone to cast aside their ego and their hurt and say, I'm going to do what's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it mean that the emotions that we feel are no longer there, right? And in fact, forgiveness is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a choice to do. And He rewards us immensely for it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with it at the end of the day in the way that He deems to be most just. So now she's validated her own hurt. She has this relation, she's made it a point to forgive him. She wants to prioritize her relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but she's still struggling with how does she maintain family ties. Now, if you guys don't know, right, family ties in Islam, and someone had mentioned that they were a convert. So I'm gonna Windstorm, thank you so much for the sweet, sweet comment. Wa alaikum assalam, Leila from Morocco. Thank you guys so much for joining. Let's talk about family ties real quick, because she's referencing family ties. What does that even mean? In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically we're taught Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose who our family members are going to be, and we have a very high level of responsibility towards them, regardless of the way they interact with us. There's actually a hadith. Let me bring it up, inshallah, so I can tell you guys it exactly. Wasallam said, do not ever sever your relationship with a member of your family, even if he severs his relationship with you. There's another hadith. Let me find it. There's one that I find to be very, very telling. He who believes in Allah on the last day, let him maintain good relations with his kin. Still trying to find the hadith. There's one specific hadith, I'll just tell you guys what I want to get the wording very specifically. But essentially, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the ties of kinship are suspended from the throne of Allah, and whoever cuts the tie of kinship, Allah will cut his ties with him. And so this is very counter to the cultural norm of if your family members are toxic and this and that, you just cut off relationships with them, cut ties with them, go, what do they call, no contact. This is actually very scary because I was on TikTok. And by the way, you guys, if you don't know, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok. I post on there pretty frequently. You can find my handles, inshallah, in the description below and in the description of any of my videos. But I was on TikTok recently and I saw this girl. She was Daisy, I believe she was Pakistani, from Texas, who was doing a get ready with me. And she was detailing the way she had went no contact with her narcissistic mother. Now, what is so sad about this is that as she was describing this, I was like, oh, this is so sad. It's sad to see that this is how non-Muslims deal with their parents, even in the worst of situations. Come to find out that at the very end, she mentioned Ramadan. She said, it's sad that I sometimes I miss it. I wish I could spend Ramadan with them. And it hit me. Oh my God, she's Muslim. There's something really, really wrong when a Muslim sees a piece of content of yours and their first automatic assumption is that you're not Muslim. There's something really wrong there. Now, there's a reason why I can speak so highly about trauma and these situations that I talk about, because a lot of people are going to say, well, you have no idea what you're talking about, and how could you oversimplify something that's so complicated when you haven't experienced it and you don't know how hard it is. I would say hold your assumption, because there's a lot about me that people don't know, and I just don't share it because I don't feel it's anyone's business to know. And there's still people who it's still their story and I don't get to tell it for them, regardless of how they've affected me. But I've done the work, I've done the healing, and so I'm here to deliver it to Muslims just like you guys so that you can do the work. We don't get to just cut ties. We don't get to just cut contact. We can't do that. So how do we navigate these relationships so that we're still fulfilling what Allah is asking us to fulfill, but we're not putting ourselves in a situation to be hurt, right? To be constantly battered and beaten by the people who are supposed to love us and supposed to be the best to us, but are causing us so much difficulty. Right, so she's angry for obviously the pain that was caused to her. She's also angry for the fact that her mother had to deal with the abandonment, right? Sometimes we forget about this. When one parent is abandoning the home, who has to pick up the slack? Who has to do the work? Who has to take on the emotional and physical burden of maintaining that family unit? It was her mother in this instance. So I can completely understand how she could feel so much disdain for her father. Your feelings are not wrong. It's not haram to feel some sort of way. And especially in this case, this is oppression, by the way. This is considered oppression. Oppression is when you do not fulfill the rights of a person that were given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is oppression. He's not fulfilling the rights. She's feeling oppressed. You're allowed to feel angry when you're oppressed. You're allowed to feel hurt when you're oppressed. Again, she's still prioritizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how is she going to do this? How is she going to deal with this? How do you, if you find a situation where you're dealing with either a toxic parent, a parent who's abandoning you, a parent who's narcissistic, a parent who just constantly is hurting you, or a family member, parents being having the most impact, but another family member. Well, maintaining the ties of kinship, and this is, again, these are not my words. I actually asked scholars about this because I wanted to be very, very careful about how I deliver this to you guys. What is maintaining the ties of kinship? It doesn't mean you're texting them every day. It doesn't mean you're over their house every weekend. It doesn't mean you're calling them all the time. The Prophet ﷺ says that a believer doesn't get bit from the same hole twice. Meaning, if something caused you significant harm, you're not supposed to go back to it and receive the same exact harm in that same exact way. We're supposed to hold ourselves to a certain level of dignity as Muslims. And so we need to have our protective mechanisms. We like to call those boundaries. There's a way to have boundaries that is actually Islamic, even though, again, a lot of times the way we hear boundaries discussed is very un-Islamic. But you have your boundaries and you still do what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right here, you see that piece that I said? You still do what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what distinguishes a believer from a non-believer. That is what distinguishes a true Muslim, a true person who submits to the will of Allah, from a non-Muslim. We do not allow our ego, our emotions, the struggles of our lives to separate us from fulfilling Allah's right. Because it is His right that we fulfill His command, and His command is we keep ties. So, upon investigation, this is not my advice. These are the advice of the scholars. What is the minimum amount? The recommendation is the 2 Eids and maybe during Ramadan. Go give salam. If you can give a hug, give a gift, and know that you fulfilled your obligation by doing that. Now, if you are going through your healing work and you feel like you're able to actually maintain a relationship with them that's even higher than that, you get the reward of it. You get the benefit of it. It's all khair if you're willing to do that. But if you find that doing it more frequently than that actually ends up causing fights, causing you to say things to that person that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because the Quran tells us, wala uffan, like we can't even say uff to our parents. And so when we're in a situation where we're so emotionally heated because of the hurt that they have caused us and the hurt we're experiencing, you're going to go far beyond uff. So you want to minimize those interactions, those opportunities for that to happen. And additionally, you have to be willing to do your own healing, your own emotional work. You have to, because otherwise you're going to keep carrying this pain. And she mentioned, right, it was interesting because I'm going to pull this up because there was interesting wording here. And very often when we put in the work, right, healing is such a crazy journey because it's like you'll feel like you came so far and then you realize that you actually didn't, and then you have to go back and reinvent the wheel, and you're like, okay, I need to heal more, and this thing still bothers me, and this thing still triggers me, and I still get really emotional about this situation. If someone says this, it reminds me of this, and then I lash out, or I shut down, right? It depends. People have different reactions to their trauma. She says, I think I have done the healing work, but I know deep down that if my husband shows me a similar trait or compares me to my siblings, it will trigger me. She's done healing, but she's not fully at the finish line. You're never fully at the finish line. There's always a maintenance time, I like to say, or like a maintenance period after you've done the heavy duty work of your healing. But she's still got, inshallah, a long way to go, and that's okay. It takes time. There's a lot of work that has to be done to treat father wounds or issues like that. By the way, this is actually a good time to plug, inshallah. I am a trauma coach. I have a trauma group coaching program for Muslim women specifically. If you're a Muslim woman who's dealing with any type of trauma and trying to heal from that, and you want a scientific, systematic, Islamically framed way to do this, my trauma group coaching program is a 10-week long program. It's awesome. You guys can see testimonials on my website. To be put on the waiting list for the next cohort, inshallah, there is a link in the description. Just look for the trauma group coaching link. You can go there, you can submit the form, you'll be put on the waiting list. I hope that, inshallah, it's of benefit. To my brothers who are watching this, I also want to know how to best serve you guys in a way that still maintains Islamic appropriateness. Because trauma work is so vulnerable, I just didn't feel like it was appropriate to do a group coaching with men only. And I wasn't, so there's another option that I'm toying around with, which is starting a community. You guys can let me know how this sounds, but I'll tell you the idea. It's starting an online paid community where I would do group coaching sessions. It wouldn't be as intimate, it would be much larger, but still teaching you guys all the resources, all the tools, all the tricks, all the knowledge to help you heal from your trauma, and also being able to take more specific questions kind of towards the end of these sessions. It would cost much, much less than what the trauma group coaching program costs now and be more accessible. But for me to be even willing to put all the effort, because that's a lot of work to build out a paid community, I need to know and hear from you guys if that would be something that you're interested in. So if you're watching this live or you are watching the replay, please let me know, inshallah, in the comments below whether or not that would be something you're interested in. It wouldn't just be for drama or trauma healing. It would also include other aspects of healing. How do we spiritually heal ourselves? How do we emotionally heal ourselves? It could be physical healing. I just want it to be a healing community with an emphasis on trauma work, because barely anybody in the Muslim community does trauma work in the way that I do, where it's kind of for the lay person. And so I'm really hoping, inshallah, that would be of benefit. Let me know what you guys think. So she's still on her healing journey. She's saying that, if my husband, future husband, compares me, then it's going to end up triggering me. Why? Because it literally reopens that wound that her father caused. It reignites the same emotions. So let's talk about this a little bit, inshallah. Let's talk about this. The thing about trauma, whether it's from abandonment or abuse or whatever it is it rewires our brain. It rewires our nervous system, and our brain is a part of our nervous system. So that experience you have when you are triggered by something, right? Meaning someone says something or does something, and it deep in your brain spikes a connection to what had happened in the past or with another person that you felt was harmful to you. And your brain will ignite the same emotions. Why? Because it is trying to protect you. So here's the thing. Let's say you have one traumatic experience, or you have multiple traumatic experiences, or you deal with someone who's just very toxic, and it's constant re-traumatizing while living with them. Your brain starts learning this is not a safe situation. This is harmful to us. Our brain at its baseline wants to protect us. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built it. And so the oldest system in our brain is our fight or flight system. Meaning when something happens, before we even have time to think about it, our brain is going to either make us run away from the thing or stand up to the thing. And then there are actually other reactions that a lot of people don't know about called freeze and fawn that are also in the fight or flight system. So it skips the thinking part of your brain and goes straight to the emotional part of your brain called the limbic system. Your amygdala lights up, which is a part of your brain that deals with emotion. It connects now, after it has a reaction, it connects to your hippocampus, which is where your memories are stored. And it basically tells your brain, hey, remember this specific thing that triggered us. So then the next time it happens, you can have the same reaction so that you protect us. You kickstart the fight or flight reaction so that you're protected. So this is why people get so triggered so easily, and you feel like you lose control, because your frontal lobe, where you're thinking, where you're decision making, that part of you that keeps you calm and centered and being able to think through things, gets turned off. Basically, you can see it on a brain scan when you are having a being re-triggered and your trauma is being triggered. We can document that on a brain scan. We will see this part of your brain go offline and this part of your brain start lighting up like crazy, right? Because this went off and fight or flight kicked in, the limbic system kicked in. The way you deal with trauma is you have to learn how to regulate your nervous system again, so it stops going from here to here. It stops going from thinking to fight or flight immediately. That is called nervous system regulation. There's lots of different ways to do it. This is literally what I teach in my group coaching program. So that's exactly that is basically the very basic way to understand the neuroscience of it. It obviously gets a lot more complicated than that, but that is what, inshallah, her healing process will also look like. With that being said, I think I touched on everything that I wanted to touch on. I think it is absolutely beautiful, Jamila, that you are trying so hard to prioritize the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and know that He sees that and He's going to, inshallah, make easy for you. There's a beautiful verse that I love. I always find myself coming back to it. And let me find it exactly for you. I don't want to mess up the wording. This is why I love having a laptop in front of me. Okay. So this is why we prioritize the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Okay, so the verse is from Surah Al-Talaq, and it is verse 2 to 3. I'm going to read the latter end of it, inshallah. وَمَنْ يَتَقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ, it's too tiny, بَلِغُ أَمْرِهِ. So the translation goes as follows. And whoever has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He will make for him a way out and provide from them from sources they could never imagine. And whoever puts their trust in Allah, then He alone is sufficient for them. Certainly, Allah achieves His will. Let me tell you guys more about this verse, inshallah. من يتق الله يجعل له مخرجا. Whoever has taqwa of Allah, God consciousness. My channel is all about God conscious self improvement. Do you guys now understand why? Because taqwa is one of the foundational principles that every single one of us as Muslims should be carrying with us. It is the thing that makes everything so much easier, and it is what is constantly emphasized in the Quran. يجعل له مخرجا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make multiple ways out of the hardship that you're in, the struggles that you're in. The scholars say with this verse, it's not just that Allah makes a way out, but He makes multiple ways out, meaning He opens the doors for you. وَيَرْزُقَ مِنْ حَيْثَ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. And He will give to you rizq, He will provide you sustenance from places you didn't even know. Have you ever had that experience where like you're worried about something and then you decide I'm not going to do something that's not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all of a sudden the door opens and you don't even know how it happened, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just like makes it happen for you? That's His response to your taqwa. So when you do something like this, as difficult as it is trying to maintain a relationship with someone who's toxic and hurtful, it makes you not even feel human sometimes, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make a way out, and He's going to give to you better. And sometimes that might look like when we're on our healing journey, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give us our own family, inshallah, our own children, our own husband, our wife, that is so healing for us. Right? And then we get to almost recreate the family that we wish we had, and the generational trauma, because we don't continue the patterns that our parents continued with us. That might be one of the ways. Or it might be that He gives you a community around you that is so loving and uplifting, and it helps with your healing. Just remember that it never, inshallah, it's never for nothing. Let us move on to the final question. You guys drop your questions, your comments, your reflections, inshallah, on this in the chat. I'd love to read them. Okay. And while I'm waiting to hear from you guys, we'll jump to the final coaching question of today's episode. This is from, I want to say it's pronounced Nosy, in California. And I don't know if it's a he or she. I'm going to assume it's a he, but Nosy says, Dear Hannah, I hope this message finds you in good health. I'm currently on a journey of operating in my higher self. I'm spiritual and would like to know more about Ramadan from a spiritual perspective. I would like to fast and pray with the collective. Thank you for any guidance or love you can share. So, something told me that Nosy might not be Muslim, because just the wording of it is very different than what a Muslim would typically say. So I'm making assumptions here, but I think he or she might be very spiritual, and they find obviously that this is a very spiritually uplifting month, and so wants to engage in it. So the question is, how, for non-Muslims, if there's anyone who's not Muslim who's watching this or is interested, how does Ramadan benefit our spirit? So first and foremost, anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands is a benefit whether you are Muslim or not. The benefit is heightened for the Muslims because the foundation is taqwa, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, when He talks about fasting the month of Ramadan, that fasting has been prescribed to you so that you may attain taqwa. So what is the ultimate spiritual objective of Ramadan? You fast so that you can obtain God consciousness. What is that connection? Fasting, God consciousness, how does it happen? Well, you can think about it this way. When we fast, we make for ourselves haram what was once halal, meaning what used to be completely permissible for now a period of time is impermissible and unallowed. We are not allowed to eat for a certain period of time. We are not allowed to drink for a certain period of time. If you're married, you're not allowed to be intimate during that time. These things that usually would have been completely fine are no longer allowed. What does that do? First and foremost, it just shows very straight up, right? This is what submitting to God looks like. God said this thing you're not going to do anymore. It might not even make sense to us. We're not drinking water, not even water, right? All the Muslims, all the non-Muslims are like, not even water, which is funny because how many people just don't drink water throughout their day and never even think about it, right? But we don't even question it. We're like, okay, not even water, ya Allah. سمعنا وأطعنا. We hear and we obey, right? That is the mindset of the believer. But then what that does is we're starving the body essentially. Not actually starving, it's starving if you end up eating, but you're starving the body to feed the soul. That is the spiritual side of it. Because we are no longer occupied with these basic desires of us that sustain us, we show ourselves you can actually survive out of this. And now it opens up a world of opportunity to solely focus on your internal spirit, your soul, right? Your ruh, which is someone said this and it was an interesting thing. It was like, we will never leave our homes without our phones charged. But how often do we leave without our soul charged, right? So this is kind of that 1 month out of the year where we're really supposed to hyper focus. This is our spiritual boot camp to reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without the distractions of the things that we typically think that we could never go without. In addition to that, right, the prayer. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so deeply because this is the month that He revealed the Quran. The Quran is also supposed to be a huge means of reconnecting spiritually. And so the words of the Quran, we believe that there's multiple benefits to it. Even if you don't understand the Quran, if you're a Muslim, you believe that there is benefit to recitation of the Quran because there was a scholar of the Quran who he was just he was described as he would open the Mus'haf, the book of the Quran, and he would not even look, and then he would recite, right? So the student of his, she was describing him as a teacher, and she was like, he'd open the Mus'haf to Surah Baqarah, but he'd be reciting Surah Al-Ma'idah. And the only reason he would even open the Mus'haf, he said, because it's worship to open the Mus'haf. So even if you don't know what you're saying, the spiritual blessing of the Quran is so huge that to hold the Quran, obviously in a pure state, is worship. To open it is worship. To look at it is worship. To read words that you don't even fully understand because maybe you're not fluent Arabic is worship. To recite with difficulty, you get even more reward. That is part of our spiritual renewal as well. And then additionally, prayer, dua. When I say prayer, I don't mean salah. I'm talking about supplication or dua, as people generally know it. This is a time where Allah is more than any other time answering our du'as. And obviously, we are waiting for Laylat al-Qadr, the night of decree, the night of destiny, right? Where we believe that Allah will destine for the rest of the year what is going to happen on that night. And so when we come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our du'as, asking of Allah, we are intervening on behalf of ourselves. What ends up happening is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may take those into consideration with the next year of decree. So all of these different aspects of Ramadan are meant to build the soul, build the spirit. So Walaikum assalam, Amina. You are starting fasting tomorrow. Inshallah. I hope that it's of benefit. If you guys are not already following, I have a series on my channel called Ramadan Dua Accelerator, where I walk you guys through different du'as from the Quran. They're in the Quran for a reason. So it's like, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose these du'as to be in the Quran? We'll talk about the context of them, the benefits of them, in the lessons that we can learn, and how to use those du'as in our lives, inshallah. So follow that. It's a very short series. Each video is like right around 10 minutes. And I post one every single day. So inshallah, that could be of benefit to you guys. Wa alaikum assalam to HK. Thank you so much for joining in. You're the OG, wallah. If you guys don't know, HK was there when I had only like 200 subscribers. Subhanallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for being there from the very beginning. I was going to say something. So we talked about taqwa. We talked about starving the body to feed the soul. We talked about dua. We talked about Quran. We talked about qiyam, the standing in prayer, right? Qiyam is supposed to, qiyam is an act of worship that is voluntary that you can do at any time. But obviously we do it during Ramadan a lot more because of the blessing that is in the nights of Ramadan. Specifically, the nights of Ramadan have have a special blessing associated with them. Qiyam al-Layl being the prayer where we stand up and we pray as many rak'at as we possibly can. And Taraweeh is considered a type of Qiyam al-Layl. That one-on-one time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a complete act of submission, where when you're in Salah and you enter into Salah, nothing is supposed to break you out of Salah. For that moment in time, you are required to fulfill the entire cycle of prayer, and then you end it, right? Whereas with Quran, I can read one verse and then be done. I could read one page and be done. There's no amount. But if I'm in Salah, I have to do my takbirat al-ihram, read Surah Fatiha, go into ruku', get back up, go into sujood, get back, get back up, go into sujood again, and you have to complete the cycle, or your Salah is not completed. So that is also a means of spiritual renewal. Wa alaikum salam. Feel free to ask your question about hijama, inshallah. Let me just close up really quick, and then I can answer some questions, because inshallah we'll be starting, or I'll be able to answer questions. So I want to share, we're going to close up, inshallah. Like all episodes, I'm ending off on a verse that I think is incredibly beautiful and also relates to what we've been discussing. And this is from Surah Al-Isra, verse 23. And I will read the translation for you, inshallah. And your Lord has decreed that you worship not except him, and to parents good treatment. Whether one or both of them reach old age while with you, say not to them so much as uff, and do not repel them, but speak to them a noble word. So there's something very interesting about the wording of this, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, right? And so it's translated as to parents good treatment, but ihsan is so much deeper than that. Ihsan is the most excellent of what we are able to muster up, right? The Prophet ﷺ described ihsan as being when we worship and we act in a way as if we could see Allah, and even though we cannot see him, we know that he sees us. That's what ihsan is, right? It's this constant God awareness. I wouldn't say self-awareness, but it's awareness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching. And the thing that is really incredible about this is, everything that I talked about in the very beginning, where I was talking about, you have to make sure that you are interacting with them within the capacity that you're able to, where you're able to limit the amount of maybe animosity that you'll show, or any lashing out that might happen, but you're still fulfilling the rights. Ihsan as a concept still reflects that you can do it that way. So what do I mean by this? Ihsan means excellence, right? And so people, when they think of this, they think of the person who, like, they do khidmah of their parents, like always serving their parents. They hold their mom's hand. What do you need? I'm going to do anything for you. Do you need anything? When they leave, they make sure they come. If they move out, they make sure they visit all the time, right? That is ihsan for that person. But ihsan is an individual thing as well, because what is ihsan for me might not be ihsan for you. So if that person has really sweet, great parents and they are able to do khidmah to them and it's not taxing on them, that's ihsan for them. But if you're in a situation where you have parents who are very harmful towards you and have caused you a lot of damage, in your situation, ihsan is doing the best that you can do to fulfill their rights and not harm and not cause harm back. So that might be the minimal visitation. That might mean I'm going to leave when I'm starting to get angry, because I don't want to get into a yelling battle and end up hurting their feelings because of it. That might mean that you bite your tongue when they say something and are trying to pick an argument with you, or when they invalidate you. That's ihsan too. Ihsan for a 4-year-old, if I was to give a 4-year-old an assignment and I was to tell them, draw a cat, and then I was to give a 30-year-old that same assignment and I was to tell them, draw a cat, I don't expect the 30-year-old to draw as poorly as the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old might be practicing in ihsan, right? And they give their best shot, and you look at it and it looks like a scribble, but they tried their best and that was their ihsan. Whereas the 30-year-old trying their best, they should look a lot better, right? Do you guys understand now how the concept of ihsan can go? What's ihsan for one person is different than what's ihsan for another person, because the circumstances are different. And ultimately, the underlying point is that you should still be trying your best to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while ensuring the protection of yourself as well. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was helpful to you guys. Inshallah. With that being said, you guys are going to end up hearing my stomach growling. Alhamdulillah. Actually, you guys let me know in the comments, how has Ramadan been for you, for those of you who have been fasting? Has it been easy? Fasting is usually, alhamdulillah, pretty decently easy for me. I also find, subhanallah, when I'm fasting during Ramadan, it's very easy, majority of the days. But if on any other day I just wake up and I don't eat, I delay eating, I get so hungry. It's like almost as if the barakah of Ramadan keeps you full so that you don't feel that hunger. So let me know how it's been going for you guys, inshallah. And I will end here and take some questions because I know some people had some questions in the comments. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make easy for us any strain that we have in our family, any difficulties that we have in our family. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be the ones who end generational trauma in our communities, in our families, and to allow us to be good to our children if we are granted the blessing of having children. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for any wrongdoings we may have done to our families, to forgive us if we unknowingly or unintentionally cut ties with family members, to give us the thabat, the steadfastness, the strength, the patience, the resilience to be able to fulfill his command in maintaining ties with our family, regardless of how we may feel about it. And we ask for his mercy and his ease in all things, and for him to make us a people of taqwa. Ameen. Allahumma salli Muhammad. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفر ونتوب إليك أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Alright guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and for those of you guys who are watching the replay, thank you guys as well. I'd love to jump into the questions. I'll do this for a few minutes before we officially close off. Amina, you said, my sleep seems to be always off during Ramadan. I wonder why this is. I actually have a scientific fact for you as to why this might be. Because very often we're eating much later, right, during Ramadan. When you eat later, it'll actually keep you up a lot of times. There's research that shows that eating later meals can disrupt your sleep. And so that might be it, because your body, instead of being able to send the, blood flow to your brain to do all of what it needs to do while it's sleeping, right? Detoxify or basically organize the memories that we had during the day or formed during the day. It now has to send the blood flow to our stomach, into our digestive system, and also to the metabolic centers of our body to metabolize the food that we're breaking down. So that's it. But see it as a benefit, because if your sleep is a little disrupted, that means you can get up and pray tahajjud and qiyam and you're awake anyways, so there's opportunity from worship. Immortal Techniques says, I cut ties off with my blood sister because she drives me to, I'm not going to say that word here just because it might flag my video, but hurting oneself to an extreme extent, and depression. I don't have any love in my heart for her. Haven't spoken to her in years about courting to Islam. Crossing bridge of Sirat, the first thing is cutting ties of close relationship. My sister is super toxic. You have no idea. Sometimes you have to get away from family, but the scary part is crossing bridge of Sirat in Islam. The angels ask about close relationships before salah, before fasting, before the rights of others. Actually, the first question we're asked on Yawm al-Qiyamah is about our salah. Toxic Muslim families is the reason children don't have interest in Islam. You are so right. And this is why I'm so passionate about this, and this is why I've built my platform around this, is because the damage that has happened because of abusive family members, abusive families, is you damage their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because so often people will try to use religion as their justification for this. Well, I can do this because I'm your parent. It's like, that's actually not how it works. Everyone in Islam, the parent, the child, the husband, the wife, the Muslim, the non-Muslim, has rights that were assigned to them, and we are required to uphold everybody's rights. And you don't get to stamp out somebody's rights because of a right that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you. And you also don't ever get to use the beautiful religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to justify your dhulm or your oppression. So I'm very passionate about this because it's driven so many people away from Islam. If they're still Muslim, it's driven them towards kafir ideas about how to operate with family members. I talked about earlier in this live about the sister who cut off ties with her family, and I didn't even know she was Muslim until the very end of her cut off ties with her mother, and I didn't even know she was Muslim until the very end of the video, which is like again terrifying. We need to do better. We need to be holding ourselves more accountable as a community. Imams, shaykh who are having conversations, giving the khutbah and giving lectures need to start prioritizing this, because otherwise you leave people to their own defenses and their own reasoning. And a lot of people do not know how Islam tells us to go about these things. They just hear things that make them confused, and no one breaks it down, which again was why I'm trying to do the work that I'm doing. So Immortal Technique, I'm so sorry about the situation that you're going through. If you, I don't know when you joined in, but I speak a lot about this in towards the middle of the show, how to navigate this. So we still have to maintain ties of kinship, but that can mean a salam or a Ramadan Kareem or an Eid Mubarak or just seeing them on those days. It doesn't mean a long-standing relationship. And also get up and leave when things are affecting you to a, a bad degree. There is a psychologist who's an expert in narcissism. So if you deal with anyone who's narcissistic, her name is Dr. Romani. You can go watch her content. She has a YouTube channel. She has books on this. And she does a really good job at breaking down just techniques of how to deal with a narcissistic person. She's also Indian, so she comes from a communal culture, right? So she's not going to be the first one to say cut them off completely. But if she does, obviously go in it with your Islamic lens and make sure you're filtering what is Islamically allowed and what isn't, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, girl, trying it has been surprisingly easy, and I don't feel that hungry, just some brain fog. I'll get this random hit of like nausea. If you guys experience this too, tell me. Nausea, and then randomly I get hiccups. And every Ramadan I notice this. I just get hiccups so frequently, and I think it's because there's just stomach acid. And so sometimes I would find in other times, if I ever ended up with heartburn, I would have hiccups, and it seems that I'm having them so frequently. It's funny. ADB says, I could not leave the bed this year, but inshallah will work on my nutrition. I'm sorry to hear that, ADB. If you're comfortable sharing the reason, is it a physical health issue? Was it a kind of a mental health issue that kept you in bed? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you and grant you the healing that you need to be able to maximize this Ramadan. Data says, amazing, alhamdulillah, her Ramadan is going amazing, except she's too tired to wake up for her tahajjud. I don't even know how, but I hit the snooze button before even hearing the alarm. That's so funny. So I want you to know something about tahajjud, Layla. With tahajjud, the scholars say if you make the intention and then you accidentally oversleep, you still get the reward of tahajjud. That's one. Two, sometimes the alarm, if you set the alarm like 10 minutes earlier or 10 minutes later, you'll end up setting it to a point where you wake up in a different point of your sleep cycle where you're more easily aroused and able to wake up. So try changing the time. The other thing is, according to some scholars, tahajjud, you don't have to sleep and then wake up. I take the opinion that you do have to sleep and then wake up for it to be considered tahajjud, but some don't. So you can also just pray like qiyam al-layl type tahajjud, or go to sleep, set an alarm for like 30 minutes. So, when you're first going to sleep and you're just drifting off, it's much more easy to wake you up because your brain waves haven't changed into the deeper brain waves of sleep. So try that, and then that way you get the reward of tahajjud. Immortal Technique, it's fine. You didn't know, inshallah. So it won't flag. It'll flag it if I say it usually. Amina says, I get panicked sometimes when I can't sleep. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easier for you. Sounds like there's some healing work that needs to be done. I used to experience that a lot, the panic before sleeping as well. HK, are you still there? You can give your question regarding hijama. I have another question. If Muslim parents get divorced under the same roof you live in and you live with them, they still live together and you're in your 20s, how does one manage being a good Muslim and unable to move out due to financial issues? Can you explain a little more? Because I'm just a little confused at how um are they married and then they got divorced and they still live in the same home, or are you moving back and forth with them? And how is it specifically affecting your ability to be a good Muslim? It's okay, HK. We're done with. I'm done with the episode, inshallah. So go ahead and throw your question out. If I can answer, I can. I'll try my best. We're just chatting it up for those of you guys who didn't notice. I think you can still watch the replay if you scroll back to the beginning. Oh, very cool. Does face hijama help with wrinkles? So I used to practice, I technically still do it, but hijama, I used to do hijama. Does face hijama help with wrinkles like aging? So the actual hijama that we do where we put the cup in place in one place and then leave it, I don't, I haven't heard much about it in regards to wrinkles, but there is something called facial cupping where it's basically you'll have an oil on your face or serum on your face and then you'll use these silicone type cups to pull tug at the skin a bit, and it helps to move the lymphatic tissue, it helps to bring blood flow and circulation, helps to stretch out and relax the fascia, and that helps with wrinkles a lot. I've been doing it for a few years now, and subhanallah, like you guys, I have less lines on my forehead than I did a few years back. Like I struggle to even be able to lift my eyebrows. Like you'll think I have Botox in that case, but so look into facial cupping. It's not hijama. It's just there's also something called face yoga or face fitness, and it's just basically myofascial techniques. That's basically all it is. How do you move certain, because fascia is the tissue that underlies our skin but is on top of our muscle, and when it's tightened it can tug on the skin and cause wrinkles. A lot of people don't know this, and especially if you have a lot of like fluid in your face, lymphatic fluid, you get that puffiness or swelling. It also weighs down the skin and causes it to sag more. So just look up, there are so many videos on YouTube about face yoga and different techniques. You can go for specific, this is so off topic, but it's okay, I'm happy to help, inshallah. You can look for specific areas of concern. So if you have wrinkles over here or nasolabial folds are intense or forehead line, just look up face yoga for forehead lines, for example. With that being said, you guys, inshallah, I am going to end here. Thank you so much for those of you guys who joined live. Remember that I go live every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is the first season of the show. It'll be ending at episode 10, inshallah. And if you want to submit any questions for live coaching, then you can go to the link in the description below and inshallah submit your question. You'll be emailed if I choose your question. Submitting no longer guarantees that you're going to have the question featured, because there are just so many questions now, subhanallah, but I will try my best to be as fair as possible with all of this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you guys. I hope your Ramadan goes extremely well and is blessed. Keep up with the channel because I have several other videos coming up. I actually have one, someone had mentioned that they ended their menses. I'm going to be posting a video soon about how do we maximize Ramadan while on your period for Muslim women. I think that's something we often don't talk about, and we lose out on a lot of the blessings because a lot of us get lazy during that time. And I will see you later, inshallah. If you guys can give a salam in the chat before I go, I would love that. Oh, you're asking about the person. So I had a client who had a seizure while doing hijama. This is why I always say if you're going to go to hijama, please go to someone who's medically trained. I am a PA. I have a degree in medicine. Thank God she was with me and not any of those other people, because hijama is a medical procedure. So what probably happened is with seizures, if you lower the stress threshold or you cause stress to the body, it can trigger a seizure. And she didn't know she had a seizure disorder, by the way. She had maybe one seizure when she was 6 years old and then never had one since then. But she didn't even know it, never been diagnosed, so she didn't even put that in her history. So what likely happened was hajama is very intense on the body. I mean, you stimulate the immune system, you stimulate the neurological system with it. And so all of that stimulation of different body systems likely lowered the threshold and then that led to the seizure breaking through basically. So with that being said, now I'm very mindful. If I ever have a patient who has seizure disorder, I mean we go through a lot to make sure that she's very careful. Yeah, it was a medical clinic. So alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Awesome. Assalamu alaikum to everyone and thank you guys so much. I'm gonna end the stream now. Bye.